Okay, good morning. This is Senate National.
It's probably me.
Okay,
Okay, we should be good.
okay,
Yeah.
great. All right, good morning. This is Senate Natural Resources and Energy. And it is Friday, February 20th. And we have so many members of the Land Use Review Board here with us. Welcome. So glad that you're here. We have so much to talk about, and I'm delighted to be jumping into this. So I'm going to turn it over to Janet. Janet.
Thank you, Chair Watson. Thank you so much for having us. I am here, Janet Hurley, the chair of the board, with three of my colleagues who will introduce themselves shortly, but we appreciate this opportunity to let you know where we are with the Act 181 rollout, and for an opportunity to comment on some of the proposed tweaks to what we are implementing. So Jude, can I share?
Yeah, you have permission.
Okay.
You just click the little share thing.
Yeah, I'm on that. I just want to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Sorry, there it is. Okay.
Is it under Sarah Hatt's name?
Yes, okay, I got it. Okay, is it showing?
It is.
Okay. So as I said, I'm Janet Hurley, the chair of the Land Use Review Board. I live in Windham. We've been at this for a year. Before taking the board position, I was a regional planner for the Bennington County Regional Planning Commission. And before that, for 8 years, the planning director in Manchester. I would like my colleagues to introduce themselves to you.
So I'm Alex Weinhagen, another one of the 5 board members. I live in Burlington, and prior to joining the board last year, I was a municipal planner for the town of Heinsberg for about 20 years. Prior to that, the town of Westford.
Pete Gill, I'm the executive director for the Land Use Review Board, formerly an attorney for the Natural Resources Board, the successor. Thank you for having us.
And I'm Sarah Hatt. I am from St. Albans, Vermont, my hometown. And before joining the Land Use Review Board, I was the town manager of Fairfax. And before that, I was the director of planning and zoning and town planner for the town of Colchester. And I spent a little bit of time during grad school over in Bolton and South Burlington.
And so we're focusing first on tier 3, letting you know where we are with tier 3. Alex is going to do that. And then we'll turn it over to Sarah to let you know where we are with tier 1A. And I'm going to go take a seat and let Alex come up here, and I'll press forward on the slides as he tells me to.
Thanks, Janet. You can advance to the next slide.
Okay. Oh, I should be in. Yeah, sorry. Didn't see that I wasn't.
So, as Janet said, thanks for having us, and happy to answer questions beyond tier 3, but there's been a lot of talk about tier 3 as one of the Act 181 rollout items, and that's I've been the board's project lead on that, so I can give you the summary. So the drafting of a map is part of what tier 3 is. Tier 3 are areas that will have enhanced Act 250 jurisdiction. So not just large projects, but potentially most projects. And so tier 3 are areas of the state that are critical natural resources where some level of review and good design is necessary. And Act 181 granted our board the authority to determine where those areas are and what the jurisdictional framework should be within those areas. What types of development should trigger an Act 250 permit and what should not. So we formed a working group, tier 3 working group last year of about 25 folks. One of them is seated behind me. Thank you, Megan. And We've been working last year with them to sort of scope out what should these areas be, what resources should be included in the tier 3 areas. And we've also been working on drafting the rules that would surround that. So it's a two-part effort, it's a map, and it's a set of rules. We released the first map and very rough draft of the rules in October and went to public engagement sessions around the state, 4 of them. To introduce the concept to Vermonters and to start to get feedback. We're working on making some pretty substantial revisions to both the map and the rules that we hope to have ready for everyone to look at next month. And we intend to do another round of public engagement then. And our original hope for the timelines outlined in Act 181 was to polish it up and have a final round of public engagement in May or June. Finalize the rule at that point, deliver it to LCAR, and be able to have it come into effect on the December 31st effective date. That's when tier 3 begins in Vermont under Act 181 is December 31st of this year. So that's been our plan. And I would tell you that at the public engagement sessions in October, I was hoping that Vermonters would start to give us some substantive feedback, like this is my 40 acres and you've got this mapped and I think you should change it a little. Like I know where the sensitive areas are and you didn't quite get it. That's not what we heard in October. What we heard was, I don't understand what this is. I'm really kind of afraid of what this could be. And I need you to explain it to me because I can't give you feedback until I understand. And so we heard that loud and clear in October. And we did get enough substantive feedback, especially from our excellent working group, to make course corrections and to work on these revisions. But the education of Vermonters about what this means and what it will mean to them is still ongoing and needs more time. I fully expect that in March, when we roll out the next version, there's going to be a lot of sighs of relief, but there's still going to be a need for people to just be introduced to the topic. And we heard that loud and clear as well, that the people who showed up at our public engagement sessions in the fall said, most of my neighbors don't know about this yet. You guys got to do a better job of getting the word out. And we took that seriously. And so my intent is to do more this spring to get the word out. So anyways, that's sort of where we are. I skipped over the substance of what's in tier 3. Our intent, and based on the input from our stakeholder group, was to make sure that these areas were not duplicative with existing permit protection programs through the Agency of Natural Resources. So while the statute requires us to consider at least 6 resource areas, we thought about all of them. And so we looked at 17, but most of them are either already protected under an A&R permitting system or will be. So river corridors, for example, A&R is getting ready to stand up a new permit process for developing river corridor areas. River corridors was one of the resources that Act 181 said we had to consider. We did, and our group felt it doesn't need to be an Act 250 jurisdictional trigger because there will be an A&R permit that will cover. And that permitting system will be targeted to the river corridors themselves. It'll actually do a better job than Act 250 would because of that. So we whittled down the list of critical natural resource areas with that in mind, and some other criteria for what should and shouldn't be included. And what we ended up with that we released in October were 3 components, 3 areas. Those are significant natural communities that are mapped by Vermont Fish and Wildlife, but only the rarest types of those, and only the types that are non-wetland, because again, Vermont has very robust wetland protection rules. We don't need to have Act 250 jurisdiction in wetland significant natural communities. So we took a small slice of significant natural communities that are mapped. We looked at headwater stream areas, and those cover 80% of the state. Never going to work for tier 3. That's far too expansive. So we focused in on an intersection of other resources that overlay with headwater streams. We looked at steep slopes over 35%. We looked at poorly draining soils, and we looked at elevations above 1,200 feet where gravity is going to have impacts downstream. And by merging those, we were able to come up with a headwater stream area map that is far more narrow, about 2% of the state rather than 80% of the state. And then finally, habitat connectors. So this is a resource that gets talked about a lot, but doesn't get a lot of protection. And there is no A&R permit that really effectively protects areas for wildlife and plants to be able to move across the landscape. And as climate change and habitat fragmentation happens, we need to preserve those connections between large blocks of forest and habitat to allow for movement over time. So we wanted to include habitat connectors. Fish and Wildlife's best mapping also covers nearly 60 or 70% of the state from the Vermont Conservation Design Plan and database. And that's just not workable from a tier 3 perspective. It captures too much of the state in Act 250 jurisdiction. So we narrowed it. And we said, where are the areas that are most critical and not going to be covered by Act 250 jurisdiction through another means? And this is where the road rule plays. So the road construction jurisdiction provision in Act 181 requires an Act 250 permit if you're punching into the woods more than 800 feet. You're building that much new road, you're gonna need an Act 250 permit. The intent behind that was to try to address forest fragmentation, especially in interior forest areas. And so we felt that important habitat areas deeper in the woods would be covered by Act 250 through the road construction jurisdiction provision that will take effect in July of this year. And so the habitat connectors we selected for tier 3 were actually road-based. The areas that would not be covered by the road rule, but still are critical connectors that without which, if those areas were entirely developed, those core forest areas would be disconnected from each other along the roads. Vermont Fish and Wildlife again has a very good data set to help us with that, and so that's where we started.
Can I interrupt?
Oh, yeah, go right ahead.
So this was a big question of mine. I don't know if you heard that, but how you're defining habitat connectors, and you did just talk to it a little bit, but I'm not a planner, or this is not my area of expertise, but when I think about habitat connectors, I was surprised that it was defined along roads.
Yes,
I mean,
most people were when we rolled it out.
yeah, I mean, partly because in some senses it makes sense, but I would also think we would want to encourage wildlife to not connect through roads, but to connect through areas that are safer for them. A lot of things frankly just get hit by cars, but if we're
Right.
directing them toward roads.
Right,
So why wouldn't we be trying to create habitat connectors that are not
yeah.
on roads?
Great question. So the way that Fish and Wildlife maps habitat blocks, forest blocks, they're very large. Thousands or tens of thousands of acres. And what divides them are roads.
Yeah,
So the only place that we need to be really concerned about in terms of the potential disconnect of those blocks are roads. Except if you're talking about development deep in the woods from a large subdivision that fragments the
Yeah.
forest, and that again is something that would be jurisdictional and would be reviewed under the road construction provision. But it's not that we are sending wildlife to roads in order to make those connections, it's that the roads are what divides the habitat.
okay. I guess, so by connector. Isn't it actually more a habitat divider?
The roads absolutely are.
Okay,
And so what we're delineating in the tier 3 mapping, what we're trying to delineate are swaths of intact habitat that exist on either side of certain road segments. So, there's plenty of roads where there's houses and gas stations, and it's difficult for wildlife and plants to move from the woods in the back
yeah,
across that development, then across the road, then to the next patch.
yeah,
There are plenty of other spots along roads where the forest comes right to the edge of the road. And that swath of habitat extending away from the road that's intact and forested represents a connector between the two blocks on either side.
Okay, so the mapping that you're doing along the road, the designation of these habitat connectors, when we looked at some maps that have them on it. I don't remember whose testimony that was, we've had a lot, but, are the connectors that you're trying to protect by including them in tier 3 are the ones that don't already have development?
There you go.
Okay, that makes more sense, but how are we trying to make them actual connectors rather than dividers? And how are we doing that safely for?
So the way we want to do it is to ensure that there's a review process, the 50, with design standards that will ensure that some degree of the forest and habitat that's adjacent to the road remains. So that instead of a development punching in and maybe spreading out and taking up the entire frontage, that it might be clustered to one side or occupy one portion of it to retain another portion that would stay intact as forest.
Okay, I mean, but some of the pushback we're getting is that, that your maps are inclusive of places where there already is development but what you're saying is it's where there's not development. Yeah.
Well, so that's great question. And yes, that's part of what the revision we're rolling out next month will do, is to refine that in order to avoid more of the areas that have development, but there are places where there's great forest cover right up to the road. And Fish and Wildlife identifies it as a highest priority road segment for wildlife crossing, but there still is a house, on one side. It's not completely forested. So it's not that there isn't any development in these connector areas, it's that there's less. And that the forest cover is intact.
Okay,
So, yeah, it's not an either or, but it's a moving in the direction of less development, more intact forest for these connector areas.
so the next map you release with these forest or habitat connectors will narrow it down more.
Yes, and one thing that you might have noticed if you saw those bubbles
Yeah,
on some of the
exactly.
roads, is that they have holes in them. And where those holes exist are where structures exist. And so what we're doing with tier 3 is we're making sure that if we're mapping an area as a habitat connector, where Act 250 jurisdiction might trigger, we are excluding the area around homes, so that if somebody wants to build something, adjacent to their house,
Okay,
they may be surrounded by tier 3, but they won't be in the tier 3 area. They will be excluded from it. And we've been talking about what that area should be around homes and how to set the exemption levels in the rules so that we do not snag the person who wants to build a garage next to their house or a shed in the backyard to put their lawn tractor. Those are the types of development that should not go through.
right, yeah, okay, okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Sure. So it is the habitat connectors that have generated the most concern. Because they are located along roads and a lot of folks say, wait a minute, that's where development happens. So what are you doing? And so again, what we're trying to do in the refinements is be more selective about the road segments that will generate these connectors and leverage our protected lands so that if there is a habitat connector adjacent to a protected land that isn't going to be developed anyways, that would be the one we focus on for that stretch of road, and we could turn off the other ones that might be on lands that are not already protected. So by eliminating smaller tidbits, doing some of that, we're gonna focus and reduce the extent of them. But they will still be there and they will still impact people's land. I was just on the phone last night with someone who had questions about it, so. Anyways, those are the 3 resource areas that right now are in the first draft of the tier 3 areas. Just at our board meeting yesterday, we talked about maybe eliminating one of them. So we'll be coming back to our working group and moving forward with the next draft soon.
So I've been watching your, I was involved when you guys were talking to the RPC. Thank you for your work. I really appreciate it. I got a question. Does anybody take into consideration? I remember when I was a kid, we used to have fire watchtowers. And a lot of the roads that were in existence were created in the twenties and thirties because of forest fires. We hear a lot of talk about the asbestos forests in Vermont, but we haven't had a lot of drought since the sixties. And last year we started another drought, and so I'm just wondering if any of these forest fire control roads, for blocks where we can actually control fire if it gets in there, has that been taken into consideration?
Not with the tier 3 areas, no. Generally, when Fish and Wildlife through the Vermont Conservation Design program maps these blocks, those kind of roads don't really separate blocks. It's pretty much continuous habitat across roads like that. It's more significant roads where you see the blocks break and you have a real divide that we want to try to create a connection for. So not really those.
So we're not talking about blacktop, we're talking about.
Both gravel and paved roads, yeah, but generally not the kind you're talking about, and frankly, yeah, there's plenty that work their way into the Green Mountain National Forest and that are not seen as dividing or really fragmenting the habitat.
I know typically, I'm a hunter, I like to be out in the outdoors. Animals, you put a road in, the animals use it. And they're.
The deer do, that's for sure.
That's for sure. Okay.
Yeah,
We have another question.
One other question, just to, maybe. I know you've had a hard time with this, and people have, actually, I just want to say that protecting habitat connectors is the single, one of the most important things out of this whole. And if you look at the Vermont conservation design and really understand the box that we have and the little tenuous threads holding together, protecting them is critical. I appreciate it looking at where, maybe going to narrow it down and maybe expand the areas around housing, all that is. So I'm trying to think that through carefully, but the notion of actually doing this and protecting habitat connectors is critical to this process. So
yeah, and I think it's really important to note that the working group was very clear that habitat connectors important, but they should be of statewide significance, right? And scale matters, and as a hunter, you know that, right? So when you're on your 40 acres, the intricacies of that land and where animals travel and all of that. We're not working at that scale. We're working at the statewide and regional scale. And so the great thing about the Vermont Conservation Design data is that it is at a statewide scale and it prioritizes habitat that Fish and Wildlife has identified that scale. So we've been able to select highest priority blocks and basically set aside huge chunks of Vermont that are forested to say, those are important, but they're not going to form the basis for where these connectors need to connect the highest priority areas. Same with these road crossings. Fish and Wildlife prioritizes road crossing based on the forest cover on either side of the road. And we wanted to work with just the highest priority road segments that have the best forest cover on both sides. And by doing that, I think we're honoring the intent of Act 181, which is we want to preserve habitat connectors. We want to have a reasonable design for development that happens in them. But we really want to focus on just what is necessary to keep the statewide sort of landscape level connections and not just, in your backyard kind of thing. So we do need more time to refine, to inform. Can you go to the next slide? So I've mentioned a few of these already, but I'll just reiterate. Right now, the draft review in October, Tier 3 covers 5 to 8% of the land area of the state. That's going to shrink substantially in the next revision that we put out next month. The point is, it's a very small amount of the state. When we first started the effort, Megan can tell you, A&R provided us with maps for the 6 resource areas that the legislature said we had to consider. Many of those maps indicated 60 to 80% of the state fit the category of that resource area. So that's been part of our task, is to really winnow it and focus on one of the most sensitive areas. It's a small area. However, it is small because it relies on the road rule. And the road rule is a very blunt instrument for ensuring that interior forests don't get chewed up by development, that there's some reasonable designs. Because it's a blunt instrument, it covers a very large percentage of Vermont, or it could. And we leverage that with tier 3 to say those interior forest areas, we don't need to include in tier 3 because most development there is gonna get picked up by the road rule. So, if the road rule were to go away, which has been suggested, this session by some and some bills and last session by others, it would fundamentally change what we were doing with tier 3, and we would have to start over. So I'm not here to pass judgment on the road rule, I'm just here to tell you that there's a connection with the tier 3 mapping. I think part of why this has been hard for Vermonters to get their head around is that it is a new concept in for the Act 250 program. Well, Act 250 for the 55 years it's been around, 56, has been focused on larger development. And this is not, this is focused on development in sensitive areas, and those sensitive areas are on people's property. So that conversation we need to keep having, and we need to help people understand both why their properties are included and what levels of exemption they will have to still be able to do development, even though they might have tier 3 on it. So one other aspect before I get to our recommendations on this, our working group, several members of our working group have expressed interest in having a more targeted Act 250 review for these tier 3 jurisdictional areas. Think of it this way, if we've determined that there's this important habitat connector that crosses a road, and the landowner says, great, but I need to build a house there, it's time for me to build for my kid, I've been saving my property. So there's fine, I'll go through your permit process. But all they're building is a house. One, does it make sense for all 10 of the Act 250 criteria to be invoked for that review of that single family home? And our board feels like it's not. But the way Act 181 was set up, we don't have the authority to change and limit those criteria. If I wanted to say, that, in that habitat connector, maybe we don't need to worry about criteria 5, which is a traffic and transportation criteria, because why we have jurisdiction in that area is about habitat, not impact on roads. We would like the ability to be able to narrow the review. But Act 181 did not give us that authority. Tier 3 is a jurisdictional question, you gave us the ability to set that. But once a project triggers a jurisdiction, it's the same Act 250 review that a massive commercial complex would go through. So working group, some of the working group members expressed some interest in that. Our board talked about it yesterday and felt that was a good idea. So it's something to think about. Go ahead to the next slide and then I'll be done.
So do you have a question?
One more question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how does use value, properties and use value fit into this?
They don't.
They don't at all.
They don't. There's no connection. Yeah, we've gotten that question a lot.
Okay, so if I have land that's not in use value, and somebody next door it affects my land, but not the person that's in use value.
So the sensitive areas that we're mapping that would trigger Act 250 jurisdiction are being mapped based on where those resources are, not who owns them, and not whether they're protected, and not whether they happen to be in the current use program, which in my mind is probably the state's most successful conservation tool in our history, right? So really important program, but not tied to this, question.
Same road use,
Say again?
same road use.
Yes, yeah, the road rules the same way. It's indiscriminate. It's about how much road is built, not where it's being built. With a little bit of an exception, the road rule does not apply to forestry and agricultural access, right? So if you're building a long road to get in and do logging or forestry operations, the road rule doesn't trigger, same with farming. And the road rule does not cover municipal road building. So if the town needs to create a bypass or, put in a town road, the road rule doesn't apply to that. Thanks. So we have some recommendations. The bill that you're looking at, S 325, has great language in it. We think that it could be better. And yes, one of our recommendations is time. Please give us more. And please synchronize the effective dates. Right now, the road rule goes into effect on July 1st of this year. But tier 3 doesn't go into effect until December 31st. It makes no sense to have a jurisdictional provision tied to road construction take effect in the middle of the building season when people could be halfway done building a road. And suddenly we have to decide whether that's a jurisdictional project. So if you take nothing else away from this recommendation, please know that we really think the road rule should be moved to a winter time effective date when people are not out in the middle of a construction season. With that said, the December 31st, 2026 effective date for tier 3, we feel should be bumped a year to December 31st of 2027. That will give us more time to refine the rules, to educate the monitors, and to make sure that like this happens in a way that people understand, and we can take the fear level down a notch through iterative rulemaking, and not like, here's the draft. The real rule is going to be in effect in a couple of months. Like we can have a longer runway. So that's one of the recommendations. Move the effective dates for tier 3 and the road rule to December 31st of 2027. In your bill, I think it indicates a July 1, 2027 date. So again, don't do that. It's not an idea. So just pushing it to December 31st would solve that problem.
And for what it's worth, the dates that were in there as, to be delayed to, were replaced. So, great.
Similarly, the bill has extensions to the housing exemptions. We think those are really important. And we didn't come to consensus about what those dates should be. We did on the others, but not really on those. But what we want to tell you is that the reason those exemptions were put in place was to allow time for regional plans to be updated and all of the permanent exemptions within tier 1A and B areas, which Sarah will talk about, to come into effect. That will not be complete until the end of this year. And from what we're hearing during the regional plan review, there are lots of municipalities that are going to wait a little bit beyond that as well. They don't want to be on the bleeding edge, they want to be on the leading edge. And so they're going to let other municipalities move forward first. Because of that, having the interim exemptions expire at the beginning of 2027, I think is not a good idea. Pushing them forward to 2028, when all of these other pieces will sort of come into play, and you've had a full year of regional plans having been reviewed and municipalities able to actually leverage those tier 1A and tier 1B exemptions, I think makes a lot more sense.
So,
Yes, go ahead.
so I had been thinking extending to July 1 of 27, you're saying,
December 31st, 2027.
okay.
Yeah. A little bit further.
Okay.
For both the exemptions and the 3.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to try to sync them up. And the reasons are different though. Like the reasons I'm giving you for the road rule and tier 3, pushing those to December 31st of 2027 are both practical and allowing us to do good work. The reasons to extend interim exemptions have to do with the regional plan process and how that's evolving, and giving municipalities time to stand up those requests.
I haven't talked about 8C.
Yeah, sorry, I left that one sort of to the side. 8C goes part and parcel with this expanded jurisdiction, particularly the road rule. Criterion 8C is a new criterion that Act 181 requires us to establish rules for. So any project that is jurisdictional and needs an Act 250 permit will be evaluated against this new criteria. And that criteria is about ensuring that when you are developing deep into a forest area, that the design of your project is done so as to limit the amount of fragmentation of that forest. So we're early on in that. We frankly could use more time to evolve that rulemaking as well, even though I didn't talk much about it. We're behind on that, further behind than we are with tier 3. But what we're talking about is saying if you're in jurisdiction, you're in a forested area. Where can you nibble around the edges and easily satisfy that criteria? And where, if you're doing more extensive development in an interior forest area, you need to hew to certain design standards with regard to clustering and the like. And so it's a work in progress.
So when, thinking about your review process of, the matters as they come in, some of them you're not gonna get until December.
Right.
What is your,
For the second look. We'll get the
Yes.
first look before.
yeah,
the
okay, so the final maps that you, some of you won't get until December. How much time are you gonna need to do the review? That comes in on December 15th.
Yeah, at the final step, the review happens, and Janet can help me on this, relatively quickly, you know, within 45 days or so.
Yeah.
Between submittal and us reviewing it and issuing a decision and that sort of thing.
Less than 2 months.
Yes, but I think it's really important to understand, I used to be a municipal planner, that's my background, so I can't get away from it. There are municipalities that would like to leverage tier 1B and can't. Because they have zoning, but they don't have subdivision regulations. You need both if you want to have a tier 1B area. And it would be much more fair for those communities, which many of which are rural and still want to see development, you know, in their designated centers right now, which the interim exemptions allow. It would be much more fair if we give them another year or so of the interim exemptions in order to tune up their regulations to get the tier 1B. Or potentially a tier 1A status, which, you know, is a higher bar.
On front of extended. House.
The interim exemption.
If I can ask about this, so maybe you were gonna say this, but interested in a comment that you made, so about the interim housing exemptions.
Mhm.
You mentioned that the board didn't come to a specific date of recommendation. You have a recommendation.
I'm sort of riffing with you, Anne.
Okay.
Here on the spot, but yes.
Okay, amazing, that's fair. But I'm curious for the arguments about. Just like, what did that discussion look like in terms of where the dates ought to land?
It's a lot of what I said, but Janet, you can emphasize the parts you want to.
Well, as Alex is saying, if it expired when everything else goes into effect on December 31st, 2027, there's still a lot of municipalities that aren't ready to take advantage of tier 1B, tier 1A, and would need a little time. And there are these other municipalities, as Alex said, that are reticent. They want to see what's happening before they jump into that pool. And so there's an argument to be made to let the interim housing exemptions go a little bit longer than the effective dates of tier 3, et cetera.
Yeah, I think I don't want to speak for the whole board, but I can speak for me. Some of the regions, there's a lot of tier 1B communities. We just had a public hearing on one of them, and that was in Addison County. I was really impressed. Other regions, Lamoille County, where we also have a lot more rural communities that lack the necessary regulations to even qualify. And so much less tier 1B uptake there. And the fact is that these interim exemptions are doing good work, right? They're targeted at the legacy designation areas and providing exemptions in just those areas. They're doing a good job. And tier 1A and B will eventually do that good job too. But it's gonna take a little longer, because of what we've been talking about.
So what I'm hearing is that the interim housing exemption extension should, well, I'm not saying in a formal way be contingent on the date of the maps coming out, but that it does sort of, we should set a date that is reflective of when the tier 1, 1A and 1B, or when the maps are done. Is that
And I would say probably
Beyond
a year.
a year out?
right.
So if that's all coming to fruition at one point, let's give municipalities at least another year of those good interim exemptions. before they disappear, and everyone is, the only option they have is to get a tier 1B or a tier 1A status.
Okay, yes,
So that translates to, so the maps are gonna be, all maps will be in the 26. And then finish the process by February and March of 27. Then the towns would have them in the next 9 months. So you're saying line everything up, basically, including the exemptions. With December 31, 27.
Potentially, or given that we know how town government works in Vermont, with town meeting being important and some communities had to go there. You know, it might be better to move it into 2028, you know, post town meeting, maybe in July 1 of 2028.
Okay.
The draft that you have right now, I think, has a lot of 2027s in it, some of them July. And you have there are a couple of exemptions, the oddball ones that are, I think, into 2029. You can talk through that, maybe Ledge Council can help you understand, you know, where, to what extent you want to synchronize those, but a little bit more. I think is in order, and yeah, what you're saying, that makes sense, maybe pushing to mid
And
2020.
there wasn't disagreement on this at the board level when we talked about it yesterday, it's just we didn't finish and come to a consensus date.
Yeah,
And
Okay.
I don't think that anyone on the board would disagree with what Alex is saying.
okay, so the logic was all sort of at least agreed upon. Okay,
so last point, and then I'll let Sarah take the podium. As I mentioned, the working group expressed interest in being able to tailor which Act 250 criteria we use in these special tier 3 jurisdictional areas. And we support that, but we don't have the statutory authority to do it. Please give us that statutory authority. We can go through rulemaking. It will be a public process. The environmental groups who are very interested in Act 250 as a good mechanism will have a seat at the table to help us know which criteria are relevant in these tier 3 areas. And I think it's instructive that the NRC is all aboard on this. They actually feel like we have the authority to do it now. We disagree, our legal team disagrees, but we would like it. If you give it to us through rulemaking, we'll make good use of it.
And you heard from John Broadman last week in your joint committee on that very point from the NRC.
I think we want some input on your initial thinking about how we might tailor that.
We're happy to give you language that you could insert into the bill,
That's input.
but that language will be authorizing language, not prescriptive language, right? I don't think it's appropriate at this point for us or the legislature to say, we know which criteria apply in tier 3, let's codify that in law. I think that deserves a public process with lots of stakeholders and people talking around tables. So give us that authority through rulemaking, and our rulemaking process is rigorous.
I would just say at the very least would be delighted to have any language you would like to suggest
Yes.
on that front. And I do want to talk about that more as to whether or not we need to do that and get the opinion of our legislative council, but having that language I think would be helpful.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, and I would wanna have, I think, we're thinking out loud here a little bit, but I wanna have something that makes not overly prescriptive, but you know, we know some of the things that must be protected, just something that language that says that instead you do it. It's within this realm.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I don't know how to say, we'll think that through, but
Yeah.
by the language, we'll think about
It's
it. Some of it is obvious,
Yes.
the screen criteria, traffic, you know, be a person go house, that
Right.
makes sense.
yes, and some of the ones we would definitely include are also obvious.
Yeah.
But there are some in the middle, and that's where I think conversations would be better than just inserting into the statute. But I hear you.
Okay.
But also because we don't know yet what tier 3 is going to be.
Right, we're still in the process of figuring out which critical natural resource areas will define tier 3. I told you what 3 of them are. I teased you with that one might go away. I'm not gonna tell you which one that is. And it's not habitat connectors, I'll tell you that much. But that could change, you know, when we go to our next round of public input and our working group, you know, that may evolve some more. And boy, if you give us some more time, it'll give us the bandwidth to make it right.
So I have 2 more questions specifically to tier 3. I was not looking at your presentation digitally, so this is your last portion of this, is that right? Okay, so before we leave tier three, so two things. One is, one of the things that I know the rural caucus was interested in, one of the things that have been discussed in the building is about notification or outreach, education, that kind of thing. Wondering if you can speak to that at all, and I'll just say, one of the things that I am potentially interested in is like, if you all need more support in terms of getting the word out, educating people, that's something that I am open to and would love to, and yeah, well, I'll just say I'm open to it and would love to know what might be useful
Yeah,
for you all.
so, we're committed to the law, which says we have to do public outreach to landowners and municipalities that have these tier three areas, just so they know what it means. So we will be doing that. The rural caucus suggestion was that we send a letter to every landowner that has tier three on their property, and then it went beyond that and said, every landowner that might be affected by the road rule. That's most of Vermont, that would be difficult. Jen and I have argued about this, I would like to send that letter to every landowner who has tier three on their property, because it's a much smaller suite. But until we figure out where the tier three areas are, I can't tell my chair whether that's 2,000 landowners or 20,000 landowners, and our budget won't mail into 20,000 landowners. So.
And 20% will be wrong
Right.
by the end of the.
Right, because our grand list data is, that we have is 1 or 2 or 3 years old, depending on municipality. So, I think that, I really appreciate the rural caucus's intent along those lines. I think that the practicality of that is problematic. So what we intend to do is to use all the other levers at our disposal, including partnering with municipalities. We've had a lot of positive interaction with municipal officials who would like to help us get the word out. We've had suggestions from folks saying like, hey, just put it in the tax bill, everybody gets a tax bill. That would also be problematic as a former municipal official, I know how that works, but we're gonna use those mechanisms. Could we use more support?
Yes.
Yes, I think what we could leverage even more is more time. And that ties into our request to extend the effective date for tier three. If that moves a year, that means when we have to finalize the rules and deliver it to Elkhart also moves substantially and gives us more breathing room to do the outreach. But yes, if there were a fiscal allocation that gave us some budgetary resources to do a mass mailing, we would happily take it.
Or as Pete said, a front porch forum membership, so that.
Oh, right, yes, my first thought was that we would do that, right? And then we talked to Front Porch Forum and realized they don't just do that gratis for the state. It's a very expensive proposition to hit every Front Porch Forum in the state.
Yep, well, and I'm thinking about, time to go to farmers markets or time
Yeah.
to, just other avenues for.
There's a lot of farmers markets.
This is
You're right.
true, this is true, yeah, another.
So just a comment, when you come into our district and you're gonna hold a public hearing, let us know in advance. That way, cause I wanna be there
Yeah,
to field the questions, cause I'm gonna hear about it.
yeah,
If I'm not, number one, number two, we can help to get the word out.
excellent, excellent. I was thinking about it last night.
Yeah, town meeting week, I mean, we're going around every town, 27 towns in Rutland district,
Yeah,
and we could be talking to.
yeah, and I really think
Yeah,
that.
hot button issue.
I really think that would be a powerful tool, especially if you can extend the time horizon, so we could do it at our town meeting next year.
Next year.
When we actually have this much better developed and can educate, but I was thinking, you as legislators probably are a tool we're not using enough. Like the rural caucus, I'm working with them, we have been for months, and they're getting the word out, but I'd love to use the old legislature as a vehicle.
Right, so the second thing that I have, which is not something that I think we've talked about yet, is this idea that tier three as a part of your mapping is, as I understand it, automatically excluding potentially tier one areas.
Yes, the current proposal.
Yes, and one of the things, so does the December 31st, 27 date reflect? I guess I don't have in my head when the maps are gonna be done.
Yeah, so I'm just so glad you brought this up.
Yeah.
So, as Seth was saying, the regional plans will finish their initial round of adoption in all the tier one areas, by the end of this year and probably slopping over into the beginning of 2027. So we actually won't know where those tier one exclusion areas for tier three, we won't know where they are until the end of this year, which is another reason that it makes sense to kick the tier three, effective date further out. So yes, we'll.
And we may only know tier one B for the most part, and tier one A might lead even further,
True,
so.
Sarah will talk more about tier one A,
Right.
but that's the connections that we, we won't know the tier one areas completely until the end of this year. And right now, the board would like to exclude those areas from tier three, meaning that if a habitat connector got mapped at the edge of, your village center, and it's in a future land use type that's eligible for tier one, we would turn it off. It wouldn't be both, it wouldn't be tier one and tier three at the same time, which would be ridiculous.
Nuts, that would be nuts.
I'd be nuts. Well, and so
And yeah,
yes, go ahead.
and yeah, if it actually is a critical connector, we don't wanna lose it. So.
And I think that we feel comfortable that at least within the tier one A areas, that they're such a rigorous review to get that designation that I don't think we'll lose anything. Tier one B may be a little different, but I don't wanna speak for the board, we haven't talked about this in great depth. I think the board was responding to the statutory obligation that we not have a disproportionate impact on municipalities or regions. And
Or
one-
the ability of a municipality to build housing.
Yeah, specifically where the
meet the
tier
housing
three rulemaking cannot have a disproportionate impact on the ability of a municipality or region to have tier one areas. So we felt like the easiest way to make sure that we don't go nuts is to just keep them separate. But you're not wrong, there's that one.
And Sarah can address that a little bit, Seth, when she talks about tier
Right,
one.
I know it's in one, I
Well,
was thinking more about B than
One,
A, but
yeah.
yeah.
well, and then
So
the
what?
follow-up to that, and this is, as I understand it, is not in the law, but so after this process plays out. We take the tier one areas out of tier three, moving forward into the future, if the tier one maps are going to change or go through some process. I was speaking for myself here, I would not want a tier one area to expand into a tier three area, right? So it's initially there's this exclusion of tier one from tier three. But then after that, tier one doesn't get to go into tier three.
Interesting idea, yeah.
Alex,
I don't
we aren't
understand that.
excluding
Oh.
tier one areas,
So
tier three right now, what we're excluding is an estimate. Based on the current,
Well, yeah, so when you look at the maps, in tier three map viewer, you're gonna see these red cross hatched areas around villages and downtowns, and that's sort of an approximation of where we would exclude tier three from, just based on the interim exemption areas. But those will be refined as the regional plans identify the future land use areas around those villages and downtowns and determine which of those future land use areas could be eligible someday for a tier one. Those are the areas that would be where tier three would be excluded from. But I take your point, and maybe there's a way to write the tier three rule to honor that.
well,
Yeah,
and
did you say this again?
Yeah, I didn't understand.
So instead of using tier language, I'm gonna try to use
Real life.
real language. So right now, the critical natural resources.
Yeah,
Are excluding cities, right?
right,
So the city takes priority.
yeah,
And so, and that's fine, like, we wanna build housing, great. But once we've established that, and the city area is up for debate and potentially expansion or whatever.
uh-huh,
I don't want the city to expand into a critical natural resource area.
This is after
it's,
all the tiers been established,
done.
and, okay,
Yeah.
so if Montpelier wanted to go out into,
right,
someplace that's.
Yeah.
A critical habitat, then there would be another discussion about whether that was allowed on
Right.
this tier.
You just don't want it to be automatic. And it is true, the draft that we have right now would make it
Right.
automatic, the moment that it's tier one, we're in a
Yeah.
range, like, it would, if tier three was there, it wouldn't be tier three anymore, so we could.
right, like,
Right,
it
work
would
on that.
have to keep exempting the tier one, if the city
Right.
continues to take priority.
Right.
On into the future.
Rather than having it be a conversation and a rulemaking change before that.
Sure, and that's probably fair, I mean, maybe it's not, we automatically say that the critical natural resource area has priority, maybe it is a conversation and you try to figure it out, but I guess I'm thinking.
I'm a planner, it should always be a conversation.
Fair enough, there's a couple comments here, so.
Just a question, so I've seen the map. For my community, and it shows proposed growth areas. So I'm concerned that it's already on a map, that nothing, this hasn't been finalized yet, but. If that happens to be, somebody considers that to be tier three, would that affect that future growth area?
It shouldn't, because the reason it's on a map is because the regional planning commission is working with the town to define where they could grow into. And we're gonna keep tier three out of those.
And that's good.
areas. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're actually planning for the future.
Yes, that was one of the real beauties of Act 181 is to empower regional plans to be important. To mean something, exactly.
Good, there's a plan.
Yeah, white plans.
Yes, we do, we like.
I've taken up a lot of your time. You have any more tier three before I turn it over to Sarah to talk about the other end of the spectrum?
I think that is everything I have.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you so much.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much for having me. I'm going downshift, quite literally, from the third gear down to one. And I think our BAFTA gave a great presentation yesterday to you, touched a little bit on tier 1A and B. So I think what I'd like to do is just sort of try and pick up from that a little bit and sort of walk you into tier one, a little bit of a change in pace, because this is the area that we're talking about exclusion for accident. So, great, yeah, slide up. Just to sort of build on, I think of what you heard from Charlie and Catherine yesterday, is what we're undergoing right now is a process where regional plans are coming to us and we're looking at their future land use maps. And what those future land use maps are doing is they're setting up specific growth future land use areas. There are 4 growth areas that are eligible for tier 1B and 3 that are eligible for tier 1A. So what that does is it sort of sets the framework, because I think there, you asked the question of like, where are these areas? We don't know yet because we haven't gone through all the future land use plans. A lot of these conversations are happening in communities right now. Our RPCs are really hitting the ground running, trying to have as many of these local conversations with their municipalities as possible as to where they want them, where they don't want them. And so what that will set up is once these regional plans come to us for their confirmation, they're through the pre-application, they actually have their full adopted plan and these future land use areas are set. And we can begin to take a look at that sort of next step, which is just because these areas are future land use categories, doesn't necessarily mean that they're tier 1B. We have some communities that want the future land use category, don't necessarily want the tier 1B right now, don't want the tier 1A, but it sets it up for the future. What can happen is communities can request tier 1B with the regional plan, or they can go back to their RPC afterward and say, well, I watched how the next town over did it. I think it's not that bad, we'll try it. So I think there's gonna be a gradual process. Chair there.
Is that okay?
Yes, at least do, yes. And it's interesting to see how this is all sort of shaking out. So I think one of the things I wanted to hit on as I sort of walk into tier 1A and tier 1B is what was really intended is these are municipal conversations happening at the local level that are happening. And you're having some towns, I'm gonna pick on a couple, that we've already seen so far, like Williston, that's coming in and saying, here's where growth center is right now, we don't want all of that as our growth future land use, we want to shrink that down. You have someone like Middlebury, where we were just at on Tuesday, that want to increase that, and that is going to impact what is going to be tier 1A and B home. Alright, I haven't lost you yet, but feel free to stop me along the way because it's and the A and B thing and it's sort of converse, I think you got that yesterday, but so
Drives me nuts.
So if you were to take a look at a point in the future, we're talking about next winter, when we've gone through all the regional plans. Therein, we're probably gonna have some tier 1 meetings to start, and that's the point where we have a municipality say, okay, I want to come in for tier 1. So it's not until after their regional plan makes it through the process that they can come in and request tier 1. Switching into what tier 1A is right now, it is within Act 1A1, it was prescribed to the Land Use Review Board that we had come up with application guidance, which we did in time for January 1st, because the requirements of what you need to achieve tier 1A are fairly prescriptive in 6034, 10 DSA 6034. And what that does is it sets up how we apply it. We came up with an application process that was really geared to, we're not quite sure what we're going to get right now. We want to build this to be as accessible to as many municipalities as possible. And so it's more of a narrative process for people to apply. Good, we're still on this one. So once you apply, we're using a pre-application process with that. We're trying to make it as informal as possible. Come to us, tell us what you're thinking. We can work with you on this. Be as hands-on as possible to try and navigate municipalities that have different levels of staffing through this process. And then part of that is also because once we get an application in, we have a very limited time to act. And this is going to be pretty significant to get the first ones through. We want to make sure we get this one. So you have the guidelines about where we're at on that. And we'll say that Janet and I went out to A&R's Municipal Day, ELCT, both doing presentations on what tier 1A and B are, while also listening to communities. There is a group of communities that are thinking about tier 1A that I'm aware of and I've been trying to work with to sort of get what their questions are. Because I think it is equally as important to what the application process is and letting them know how they can apply, what they need to do, what narratives they need to fill out, is what they get out. And so I'll take the next slide. And I think that's where a lot of your questions are so far, is I think there's hesitancy, particularly, I think there's conflation where a lot of people don't understand the difference between tier 1A and B. Including some really great municipal planners, it's a little bit hard to figure out. But sort of trying to demystify that, trying to explain it, and again, I think we could use more time on education. Absolutely, I think we've all done those phone calls, tried to go out and talk to people and dispel some of the misinformation. With tier 1A, a lot of the questions have been, okay, great, so we get tier 1A, we have exemptions for Act 250 for both commercial and residential development within this specific area of our town. What do we need to do as a municipality? And it gets to this question, which is in 4460G, which is the administration piece, and then there's the enforcement piece. So I'll walk you through these first of all. And so what this says is your legacy Act 250 permits do not go away when you get tier 1. Then the question becomes, what do you do with them? If you're a developer, you want to come in and amend it, what happens? And you have to let a municipality tackle it. And so this is the process that's been given for how municipality tackles that. Is they can decide that that's no longer relevant, it's been built, or you're applying those good municipal regulations to try and amend the Act 250. We looked at that as, all right, that is the transferring of a permit. So once you get through that process, your municipal permit has amended the Act 250. Staying tricky, I'm happy to take questions along the way, but, and so the way that state statute is right now is the day that you become a tier 1A community, congratulations, you're the proud parent of all the legacy Act 250 permits in that tier 1A area. That is a lot for municipality to take on, and there have been a lot of questions on that. I only know one community that said, oh, that's okay. All the rest are saying, yeah, take a breath, and it's like, wow, how many permits do we have? We have some communities that broke our database because it maxed out at 500 permits. And said, okay, we know that there are at least 500 permits. Could you tell us how many? And that's where we really want to make sure that we're working with communities, trying to make sure that this is a successful process for as many communities as possible. So we agree, that's not the way to go. The way to go is that you use that amending process to transfer. And so once you take an Act 250 permit, you're a tier 1A community. You have a developer that comes in and wants to amend. Once you amend that permit, it transfers that permit, and that is the permit that that municipality wants to administer and enforce.
Yes, wait, can I clarify? So we've heard from folks that their preference is that those existing permits become, I believe, your responsibility, the LUR's
They
responsibility.
stay our responsibility.
They stay your responsibility and not be transferred to the towns. But what you're suggesting is that all of them be amended and
No.
become the town's responsibility? I'm unclear what you're recommending.
Sorry, I lost you along the way, so let me back up. So the day that you have a tier 1A community, get tier 1. Under the current law, all the pre-existing.
Yeah, I get that.
We don't like that. I don't think anybody likes that, except for that one. What happens is, over time, you will have developers come in with projects
Yeah,
and want to amend the Act 250.
I get that. Yeah, yeah.
And the way that you do that is through the municipal permit process.
Okay, and then they become the municipality's responsibility, but in between,
They stay with us.
okay, you are on board with that.
Absolutely.
Okay,
It's just after they become a municipal permit, it would become really muddy for Act 250 to come in and say, all right, we're going to enforce these two conditions in municipal permit and municipality. You don't want Act 250 coming in and enforcing what then it is.
no, I get that. I was just trying to figure out what you're recommending happens in between the tier 1A designation and changing the permit.
So if-
Sometimes the permit will just stay there.
Right.
That's,
Right,
that would
and
be
it'll
yours.
stay with us until the landowner developer wants to make a
Okay.
change. And then they have to go get a municipal permit and it transfers, so.
Yep.
Only as only as the project is amended,
I think we're on the same page.
yeah.
So you have a,
But I'm just gonna say, so the reality is that probably 80% of the permits would end up staying with you long term. And one by one, the town might take some on. As they
Yeah,
add.
yeah.
So you might, so there'll be 500 permits in a town. The first time a town amends a permit and takes ownership, there would be 499 that you're still responsible for, the town is responsible for one. And they do them one at a time, as if it ever happens that they need to amend,
Yeah.
so
And
much more orderly,
and this
very
is,
slow.
this is the process
Yeah.
that would transfer the permit.
So, yeah.
well, I have a question about. Even after that occurs. Because I guess I'm wanting to know how. That municipal permit works and like interplays with the Act 250 permit. Does the municipal permit sort of sit on top of the Act 250 permit, or does it replace? It replaces, okay, so it's not, that I'm getting a nod, that it replaces, which is to say that, because I don't wanna be in the situation where, okay, so now they've transferred the one permit, and now the municipality is like, how do I enforce all of these criteria, et cetera, for this one permit? And we have this learning curve to do that, but it sounds like that would not be the case. It's now just the municipal permit takes over and that is all that.
It is, but the municipal permit has to look at,
Right,
they
all
have
of
to
those
take
things.
these permit conditions and consider whether that condition is still relevant, and if it is, do our local regulations address this issue? And if not, the municipal permit must take on that condition as part of its permit and must enforce it.
Got you.
So,
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Happy to take more questions, but I think what I wanna do is inch forward a little bit. Which you need to do when you're in first year, just the tier 1A, so. That section, that 4460H is that enforcement piece. And I believe what your bill has in it proposes to strike out most of what's in H, as well as the previous section entitled. I'll get to this on the next slide, but there can be a much more modest change to that. That also will make sure that if we need to ever revoke a tier 1A. Can specify what happens then, is that it all comes back to us. So we want everybody to be successful, but there was the thought process, you might also have a municipality that wants to give up tier 1A. You need to allow for that and for a transfer back to the state that we're.
So, okay, just on that point, so that process is not spelled out, doesn't exist in statute?
It does,
Oh, it does, okay,
it does to some extent.
okay. So do we need to add it?
Less than. We're just saying not to delete.
so
Oh, don't
Sarah's
forget.
saying that S325 has some strike through language. And we're suggesting a more nuanced, elegant approach.
Okay,
Correct.
Where is this in the draft?
Page 3,
And then page 8.
but page 3 at the bottom says. That the municipality is out of turn. And sort of if we need to revoke their tier 1A status, that we can then enforce. So that's proposed to strike out right now. Not necessarily sure that you need to.
okay. If you have suggested language to replace that, that would be very welcome.
That will be on the next slide. Oh, we're right get there.
Yeah.
I just want to say. We have our guidance about applying, but we realize there needs to be more work. We're working on some FAQs for municipalities about how they decide to take over administering and enforcing. So what you have in 24 BSA 4460 is a process for municipalities to take over administering and enforcing. As Janet said, they're going to have to look at their own regulations, which they're diversity of throughout the state of Vermont, and allow them to adapt. So we're doing some FAQs about how you could do that, but ultimately it's going to be the municipality's responsibility and decision. You want to go to the next slide?
Well, the one point here that we should, I think, point out is that once the permit transfers to the municipality, the LURB gets notified. And so there's a paper trail so that the LURB has some understanding of how things are going. And if maybe we start getting lots of complaints about permits not being enforced.
Can I just stop?
There's that question.
If you're gonna testify, can you come up here? It's really awkward to have you right behind me.
Sure, I'm sorry.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
So. Just, I wanted to,
The chair.
sure, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for saying that,
Yeah.
Senator Hardy.
Want to take Jan's spot? Please.
I'm fine standing there.
I just wanted to point that out because Sarah says we do have, as Sarah said, we have this ability to revoke tier 1A, or a municipality could choose not to have it, but there is there is this communication. So that, you know, there is some oversight as to the enforcement, even if it is turned over to the municipality with a transfer permit.
Wanna go on to the next one with the changes. So the first one, which I just spoke about, is we think what you could simply do within 4460H is strike the word not.
And that's it, and you don't have to have those, the other struck through.
Because we still want municipalities to have the ability to transfer permits and have them enforce them. Again, going back to what I said is, you do not want Act 250 coming into municipality and saying, great, you've amended it, now let us enforce it. So that they have a municipal process for that, let them do. Once it's transferred.
Okay, so we can hang out here for 1 minute as we. Check out bottom page 8,
Yeah,
okay, and it's. H.
So you can get them language. We can get you all language.
yeah,
Yes, that would be. Great.
So,
Sorry,
not, I think it's on line 19, that's the only knot that's in here. One knot,
This page.
is that what you mean?
Yep.
yep. Take out that word
Okay,
So-
and keep everything else on page 3 and here.
okay.
So keep the not as struck out, but reinstate the rest.
Yeah,
Yes, fantastic.
and then don't strike out on page 3.
Okay. Okay. Feel like I'm gonna want to.
Think about it.
Yeah. Right, like, what have we just reinstated? How does it?
I think we're on the
does it
same
read?
page on that.
Okay,
And we can help, again, I think that would help a lot of communities that have a lot of angst about tier 1A and administering it. I think that's a way to roll it out more slowly. And I think that's, would be fantastic. I think that's something that the board has spoken about in the.
and so your read of that change would be that it would, that would accomplish. The not transferring all of the permits
At once.
at once and allow for the sort of rolling adoption of permits as projects. come forward.
Yeah,
Okay,
and the issue that it's addressing is the reticence that municipalities across the state. There are some that don't even want to think about it because they do not want to take on the responsibility of existing Act 250 permits.
okay.
Some of the towns clearly had applied this is.
Right,
We'll call it that county.
yep,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. I think the next thing is, we actually had a question for you in terms of clarifying the intent of section 6. There is a asking for us to revise our guidelines for specific procedural standards. And again, what 6034 had was guidelines for the application process, so I'm not sure if there are new guidelines. We need to change our existing guidelines or.
Sure, well, I can speak to that, so. One of the things that we heard from. People who went on, who submitted maps early in the process. They expressed that it sounded to them like that there was learning that happened through that process, and that maybe if they had gone later in the process, that their maps might have looked different.
oh, okay,
And so the intent here was like what's the process that you all have in terms of either taking a second look at those who went early on, or how are we ensuring that there's consistency across the map so that they're all, I guess. Having to follow the same.
Yeah, so
Interpretations, I guess.
I feel like we're doing that,
Okay,
and I don't know that it's necessary to have that paragraph in there.
Okay.
Because we, as a board, we did 3 before the turn of the year.
Yep.
And we spent 3 or 4 meetings discussing, you know, how can we learn from this, how can we express how we're going to be consistent moving forward. You know, like we may have told Rutland something who was first that, you know, on second thought, maybe we shouldn't have said that to Rutland.
Okay.
And so I have been trying to find the time to work that up and
oh, sure, okay.
and transmit it out. And I haven't gotten to it yet.
But I think that
But
the other part was yesterday you heard from Charlie and Kat about blue maps are separate than tier 1. And so I come back to where I started with is communities are deciding which of the future land use areas, and then they can apply for tier 1A or 1B. And so I think that language that you have in section 6 sort of anticipates the converse of that. So I think that
because the future land use map areas are gonna be what determines the boundaries of the tier 1A. So we're actually talking about drawing those future land use boundaries consistently. And us giving the regional planning commissions consistent guidance about that.
So I think the intent that we have is just to go back to what you heard yesterday, is those future land use map areas. BAPTA has proposed some updates to the future land use that we're aware of. That we've worked with them on. I think that some of those will help clarify the process as the RPCs go through. We're very much talking together. We don't think that, particularly since what you have for language in that section 6 is focused on tier 1As. And not the future land use. We don't think that we need that, but there's something more. And again, absolutely, as I said, there's, I think, that commitment to trying to work with municipalities on more than what we're statutorily required to do in terms of FAQs, really assisting in the process.
Yeah, you know, in looking at this again, I think if I was. My thought process around this was actually beyond just tier 1A, it was just the tier 1 area in general. And it's, I mean, it sounds like you are doing that, like it's in process, so, you know, do we, and the intent here was like, just to make sure that you had some process that, sounds like what you're already doing. But noted that you're like, so that you all think that we could do away with section 6.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
So I'm gonna switch gears on you one more time. Before we leave this slide, which is also within section 8. You have 325, you have section of appeals. And what that is specifically looking at is tier 1B areas. So going back, tier 1B areas where you have active 50 exemption.
For housing.
Up to 50 units. This is fun, we should tag team this more often. Been working together a year, almost can complete each other's sentences. So I think that. Great idea. However, we don't have jurisdiction. So if you're a tier 1B community, congratulations, you've got to go back to 50 for up to 50 units. So for us to study what would make the appeals process work better in that, we don't necessarily have a role in it. So what we're going to recommend is we either move this to one of the other entities that's listed, like a VLCT. That it would be very great representational of sort of the mass of all communities. Or that maybe this gets moved into the appeals reform bill with is S-169. Because under that, then some of these appeals would come to us. And we could have more of a role. But right now, having us drive the bus that we don't have a license to drive. It's fair enough. So. Do you wanna go on to the next slide? All right, these were a couple other recommendations that you have?
So the board had, yeah, so we discussed yesterday pending legislations, and the board feels that we should recommend that you revise the priority housing project exemption language to be more in line with the rest of the housing exemptions and to address flood hazard and river corridor areas. And then, because what the current language effectively does is says, it's okay to build, affordable housing in flood hazard.
Sorry, when you say the current language, you're talking about current statute or this?
Current
or the-
statute.
Okay,
Current statute doesn't, current statute could encourage building affordable housing in the flood hazard. And the board sees this as an environmental justice issue for one thing, and why should we be encouraging any? So all of the rest of the housing exemptions address the flood hazard and river corridor, and they say it can only happen if you have regulations, and it can only happen in April, right? So the priority housing project exemption does not address the flood hazard like the rest of them do. So we're suggesting that you should address it you should add the same language to the priority housing project exemption that you have in other housing exemption, temporary exemptions. Interim exemptions.
again, if you are able to get us.
Sure.
Exactly.
Yes.
Great.
And then in the commercial to residential conversion exemption, you do not allow for new permits. Only commercial projects that have an Act 250 permit can, that already have an Act 250 permit can use this exemption. So if you have something that predates, it was built before Act 250, there are plenty of, commercial properties that have been used commercially for, 100 years or whatever. It would not get this exemption if it predated Act 250, because the words new permit is not in that paragraph in the exemption, the end of exemption for conversions. So same thing, we can provide you language, Senator Watson.
Yeah, that would be great.
I think that is all we have, right? So we are here for questions, as long as you want us now, but you can always reach out to us outside of here.
I do have a question. So you saw, Mr. Baker's testimony and like matrix testimony yesterday, or you're, at least we're.
Sarah watched it, I looked at
Okay.
the presentation, but I didn't have time to
Okay.
watch.
Something that would be useful is if you have comments on their suggested changes, because it's a whole different set of ideas and things. And one of the, just as example, so you talked about the pre-application process. One of their suggestions is including the community investment board upfront as a part of the pre-application process. And, are you amenable to that? Like, does that make sense?
So I can say to that we think that the pre-application process is the place to get as many people that have an interest to comment on that plan as possible. So we certainly wouldn't be opposed to that.
Mhm.
In fact, we would agree that it's important to get that entity in there
Yeah.
as soon as possible, because why wait until after the plan is adopted?
Mhm.
And, and the CID has a big problem with this certain, boundary that got drawn. And, we didn't necessarily see it as a problem at all, right? And so we allowed for it to move forward and they went through the whole adoption process and then suddenly CID is saying, wait a minute, right?
Well,
So we would not oppose that.
well, and that, but specifically that aspect, it makes me wonder about that sort of iterative process of going back to say, oh gosh, we need to amend what we initially said. So, and again, it sounds like you're doing that, so, but I'm imagining that that input might affect the maps. Potentially,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, that's just one example, there's a whole
yeah.
series of recommendations that they have. And your input or feedback on those would be valuable.
So the board as a whole hasn't looked at their language that they proposed. I looked at it early on, just singularly, but I didn't want to bring it to the board until we knew that if there was a vehicle for it to move forward. And the board, some of us will be gone next week because of school vacation weeks. And so we may be able to get to that early in March.
So maybe responding to legislation that's put forth would be the next step.
Or if you want us to look at what the proposal is currently, we can do that.
I think that would be valuable, I would appreciate those
So
other thoughts,
So which proposal?
Charlie Baker's proposal
Oh,
that we just heard yesterday,
okay.
and whole bunch of comments.
Crossover.
What?
We have crossover.
So,
Oh,
where
yeah.
our time is running short, so in fact. You know, if,
So I can forward the proposal from BAFTA to the board members when we get out of this room.
I'll read it on the plane.
Okay,
I've already,
and Sarah's only gone for part of the week.
I've already read it.
Okay, so, and we can discuss it on March 3rd.
Okay.
Is that,
Might have to somehow figure out a way to get some forgiveness. I don't think any of that is doing controversial, like, you know, do things. So
Even if we could get individual feedback, I don't know, maybe that's not something you do.
well, I mean, we are a board, we try to speak with one voice.
Yeah, that's fair, that's fair. Okay, well, give us feedback when you can.
Trying to remember.
I think those.
So there's,
Yes.
Senator Hardy, there are like over a dozen different little tweaks that they're proposing, and they're trying to address things that we've struggled with as board, you know, because there are different descriptions of the same thing in different areas of statute that don't completely line up. And so they're trying to address some of those issues that we've encountered, but as a board, we just haven't looked at the language they're proposing
Okay.
as a board. So some of us have it individually.
Yeah, so get us feedback when you can,
Okay,
and we'll go through our process and try to, I'm imagining that this bill may be one of the last things that we get out. But I don't wanna, we're gonna continue our work, in the meanwhile, so.
I think March first. So March third.
right,
We will still have time.
right, and just
Okay.
because of open meeting law, we can't do this behind
Yeah,
the
so
scenes via email or, you know, we have to do it in a meeting, it's
fair.
so.
Okay. Okay, well, super. Anything else? Check my list here. Check it all the next. Okay, I think having just gone through my list, I think I'm feeling good. One of the things that, actually, there's one thing that I think remember if we talked about it, things are sort of blurring together. One of the things that's on my radar is that some of the regional plans are going to expire. And meanwhile, they're hoping for an extension. I guess that doesn't really necessarily pertain to you, that's not you're not worried about that, that's not your thing. It's more more concerned of some of the towns that are gonna see their plan, or regions that are gonna see their plans expire this summer. We're gonna give any comments on.
I mean, they presented us with their estimates as to when they're gonna get their pre-applications to us and when they're going to get their final applications to us. And I'm not aware that any of them are in danger of expiring before they get to us.
Okay.
Unless there's,
Yes, but.
yeah, municipal plans are expiring here
Oh,
and
okay,
there.
municipal plans.
But I think the regional planning commissions are set on their schedules. And the ones that were going to expire before they got to us, they've already addressed that with quick updates, because I know, because Bennington County did that before I left Bennington County.
Mhm.
And they're working on a new one right now, so some of them did that, they did a quick update, I think Wyndham did that too.
Okay,
And they're, so that they could have to do this Act 181 on client update. So,
okay, yes.
One of the proposals we've heard from a variety of folks is the making amendments in the interim between the 10-year plan updates, making a shorter process for amending things. Have you all discussed that?
we have discussed that, we have looked at the language, but in the past, the board agrees there definitely should be a shorter process for minor changes.
Okay,
And
so if you have suggestions for that, that would be helpful, or if you like what
I
they
think
proposed.
we'll look at what they
Okay.
proposed and see whether it reflects what we had talked about, months ago. And, yes, we definitely think that is advisable.
Okay, great. Super, any other questions or comments? Okay,
Really helpful.
yes,
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
yeah, great, thank you so much.
And well organized.
Thank you. Sorry about the sitting behind.
No, that's fine.
Behind
It's an
Glad you
awkward
said some
room.
Okay, so, we have legislative council joining us at 11, so I think we're gonna take a break until then, but, just to, preview that conversation a little bit. So that's gonna be about S224, and I actually need to, wrap up committee time today at a little bit before 11:30. And I'm anticipating that the conversations that we are gonna have around 224 are gonna take more than the time that we have. And so, referencing Senator Bray, he used to talk about painting ourselves out of the room with a bill. So we might look at some of the pieces, we might start with some of the pieces that are not controversial, see how we're feeling about them, try to close out some of that language and walk our way through it until, get as far as we can.
Do we have what you still says, 4.2 on the video version?
Well, so, I'm sticking with 4.2 right now. We did make some suggestions around, education and outreach, but we can talk about that. So that's where we're at.
Okay.
Okay, super. And then looking towards next week, generally speaking, the plan is to try to close out some of these other bills. I'd love to finish 213, to finish 223. We're gonna make more progress on commercial pace. We may take some more testimony on, the net metering pause and the plastics bill. We'll see how that goes. Definitely taking more testimony on 325, again, making as much progress as we can on that. And then also, I'd like to be closing out. I think there's a few people we need to hear from on 219, and then I think we can path forward on that. So those are generally speaking, those are the bills that I. And
You
it,
mentioned 213.
I did, that was the
Yeah,
first one.
okay.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, that's okay.
Put the right check.
Yeah.
Or maybe some indicator that like, these are the ones that we are hoping to do. I think that's everything I wanted to say about that. Actually, before we're done, anything you folks wanna say about what we just heard from the land use review board folks?
We all been in the same room for about 2 days. With Charlie Baker's.
Well, it does feel like things are starting to gel a little bit, like the
Timing.
that was heartbeat to me, you know. There are still details to work out, but it seems like people are moving to the same page.
Yeah, I agree, and we did cancel Ellen the other day about the walkthrough of what the law of 181 is, so we will fit that in next week as well. Any other thoughts or comments?
But it's very thoughtful.
One of the things that feels helpful about this is that I think as you're saying, the vast majority of it is not actually terribly controversial. But like it does feel like people are generally going the same direction.
Yeah.
So, it's good, I'm appreciating that. Yeah, okay, so we can go off live, we'll come back at 11. Worldwide. Okay, this is Senate Natural Resources and Energy coming back from break, and we are gonna be jumping into a discussion of 224. About like a miscellaneous lake spill. So if our legislative council would join us up here, of the intent right now is to walk through some of this language. And close out sections that we. That the committee feels like we have agreement about, or at least see where our consensus lands. We're working off of draft 4.2. And we did, I think previously talk about some education.
Yeah,
Pieces.
education and outreach about decontamination and other requirements for training, things.
Right, so, for a new draft, my assumption will include that. I think there was consensus about that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So, starting, it'd be great to have, Senator Beck back for particularly the conversations about the, difficult parts, but I would otherwise say, like, let's just walk through the bill in part to remind ourselves what's here and to see how we're all feeling about these words.
So this is Michael Grady with legislative council. The first component of this matter in the bill is regarding big boats and home lake designation or registration. And the first section is the definition section in the use of waters law, which is a DEC program, ANR DEC program. And so there's that definition of the motorboat, which is just cross-referencing the definition under transportation's vessel authority. And then the definition of wake boat, which is consistent with the definition of wake boat in the DEC use of waters rule. So it's a motorboat, and it's one for the house, and it's / other devices for design features used to increase the size of the motorboat. Then,
So before we go on, this is, and just to clarify, this is, we're defining it here, is because this is not DEC. This is,
no, this is DEC.
oh, this is DEC, so
But
it's,
they don't have the statutory, they don't have in statute the definition that they adopted in.
oh, okay,
And so what you're doing is you're bringing in that rule definition in the statute. And then in the next section, you're going to have statutory requirements for wake boats
got you,
that are largely consistent with the rule.
Yeah.
But would have additional requirements for wake boats that the rule does not have.
okay, and before we go on, are we okay with that?
Yes.
Which part?
We're looking at page 2, lines basically 14 through 17.
It's one definition that's the definition of motorboat in Title 23, and one definition that's already a DEC definition in rule, we're just bringing it in statute.
Yep, that makes sense.
So section 2 is the substantive regulatory or requirements for wake boats and use of water. So the first subsection says the person shall not operate a wake boat. Shall operate a wake boat only on a lake authorized by the department under their current rule. So there's 20 odd lakes where you can operate a wake boat and within that area on those lakes. So that's the first provision. You can only operate on lakes authorized by DEC for that under their use of water. And then in order to operate a wake boat, person who owns or controls it shall own the vessel registration or validation form annually or biannually identify a home lake for the wake boat for the calendar years for which the registration or validation is valid. You heard from DMV that they can change their vessel registration form to add both a designation of what type of boat it is and add wake boat as a checkoff, and to add a provision to say if you are our wake boat, what home lake you are. Now, validation is only required for out of state and they're in state for more than 60 days consecutively. So there will be those out of state vessels that won't have a registration or validation form because they're not required to have.
And can you speak to why it's annually or biannually?
Because that is how EMD currently registers vessels, just how you register your car, you can register it annually or biannually.
Oh, I
EMD
see.
does the same
Right, it's the
thing,
choice.
so. If
Okay.
you're gonna register for 2 years, you're gonna have a 2-year registration. And in your vessel registration, in those requirements for registration, which we will see in a minute. You get a certificate that you are supposed to keep with you during operation of the vessel. So your home lake designation is going to be on that certificate. Either under validation, registration.
Yes, go ahead. Or we can come back to you.
No, so I'm really hungry. If, say somebody does a 2-year registration. And this halfway through, they move and their home lake changes, is there a process for them?
Yes, you can leave your lake. And you can basically go through the requirements for leaving the lake, decontamination, et cetera, and you can amend the registration.
That's what I mean, like if they move from one lake to
Yeah,
another.
just like you can amend your registration for a motor vehicle, you can amend your registration for a vessel.
Yes, go ahead.
So if you've got a wake boat, there's no provision in there. A wake boat that's on the home lake now, that doesn't, for them not to operate in wake mode.
There's no statutory provision in this bill that prohibits operation in wake mode. What it does is it says you can't operate that wake boat on a lake that isn't a home lake. It doesn't make that distinction of the boat can't operate in wake mode versus it is operating in wake mode. So that's I think that's a valid question.
So I know there's people that got wake boats. That as the rules change, might be on a lake that's not gonna be able to operate that boat. So rather than moving it, if they agree to operate it not in wake mode. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, that's partly what the current rule does. It says it defines wake boats, defines wake boat zones, and then defines where you can engage in. I can't remember, wake boat sports or some term like that. And so. That's a consideration. This would be more prohibitive than that.
And the rulemaking is in progress right now. Right.
There is a proposal by DEC, yes. But there's already a rule that exists.
And if they're operating right now in that on the home lake, it says they can be,
There's no home lake designation right now.
oh, okay.
It's just you have to operate in wake mode on a lake where wake sports is authorized.
Okay, would you have something? Okay, let's keep going.
So page 3, line 10, prior to entering of Vermont Lake, other than the wake boat's home lake, and prior to re-entering the home lake, that the person who owns or controls the wake boat shall decontaminate the wake boat at an A&R approved decontamination service provider. Boat washing stations shall not be considered an agency approved decontamination service provider unless approved by the agency to provide decontamination service. The last time you walked through this, you asked for a definition of decontamination station to be added to distinguish a boat washing station from a decontamination provider. I can do that. There's examples of that from around the country. Criteria such as using hot water, 140 degrees or more, located in a way where runoff doesn't discharge or run off into the neighboring or adjacent water, et cetera.
I don't know, we talked about, I agreed to do that and it failed to.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we did have some recommended definitions from Jared Carpenter. For definitions of aquatic nuisance species inspection stations, boat washing units, and decontamination stations. I think that would be useful to include those definitions, and especially if those exist in statute somewhere else, or if as you just described it, also sounds reasonable, yes,
I just, maybe I'm overthinking this,
okay.
and if I am just looking, but does that language, could somebody interpret that language to mean that they only have to decon it if they used it as a wake boat? In other words, home lake, wake boat, they pull it out, they go to some other body of water, never bring on board water, never use it as a wake boat. And then. Am I overthinking it?
I think with this definition of wake boat that's on page 2, where it has one or more ballast tanks, ballast bags, or other devices used to increase the size of the motorboat's weight. It doesn't matter if you used it in weight or not. If you have a ballast, if you have other provisions or devices within the vessel that has using water or other, or that could contaminate the lake with a aquatic nuisance species, you're gonna have to decontaminate.
Thank you.
So prior to entering a lake, law enforcement, an employee of the agency or person staffing authorized aquatic nuisance species inspection station may request person owning or controlling the wake boat provide proof of decontamination by an agency for decontamination service provider. I want to be clear that there was that on page 4, the person staffing an authorized aquatic nuisance inspection station is authorized to inform a person who owns or controls the wake boat whether their wake boats are authorized for use on the lake, but those persons are not law enforcement. And they don't have law enforcement authority, and that needs to be clear because sometimes there's tension between the staffers and the owners, operators, and the staffers need to know there is law enforcement.
Well, everybody needs to know they're not law enforcement.
Some people are.
But, no, I mean, like the person they're talking to
Right.
also. What I mean,
Yeah.
Okay,
And page 4, all current provisions about aquatic nuisance inspection and drainage. That's actually on page 4, line 6-9. All provisions of the title regarding aquatic nuisance inspection apply to wake boats. That's drainage, inspection, movement, and wake boat users shall drain the ballast of their boats to the fullest extent practical immediately before or immediately after leaving the water of the state. So
I have a note here.
Yeah, I
About
know.
striking this, I'm trying to remember, is that from Judge
It
Zoning?
was Judge Zoning
Yeah.
suggested striking it, and I think it's because he thought it was duplicative.
yeah. Right, but there's one part of it that's not, and it's the immediately before. And
Oh,
that is because it's sometimes easier for wake boats to drain before they leave the water rather than after.
So should we just start the sentence with wake boat users?
You could do that,
with
Um,
friends.
because his argument that I heard was they are vessels, and so they're already subject to the requirements of 1454, and you don't need to
Yeah.
restate that.
But if we said wake boat users shall drain the ballast tanks, the rest of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying. So striking basically
The first
6
clause.
and half and 7. Oh, okay. Are we all okay with that? Right,
Sure.
okay, that sounds good to me.
And then clarifying that the violations are gonna be brought in the judicial bureau. I don't think Judge Zone had an issue with that. We'll figure that.
Right. Okay,
Section 3 is,
before we go on to section 3, just want to reflect for a second on section 2, or for a second on section 2. Any thoughts or concerns about this? We're gonna add some definitions. I don't know if the definitions will go in this section, but.
yeah, they'll give them the first
Right.
section.
Okay. And then. A little bit of change to D, 3D there. I think that is it. Okay, great, thank you. Just wanted to pause to
Sure.
see if there's any concerns or questions about that. Okay, moving on.
So moving on to section 3, this is the section that lists all the judicial bureau's authority. And I can't remember if Judge Zone wanted to change there or not. I don't think it's beyond what's already proposed. I don't think anything else is additionally needed.
In section 4, are you?
Or section 3.
Section 3.
Look, the note that I have says that it aligns with 1454,
Okay.
so.
So then page 5, section 4, these are the existing provisions related to control of aquatic nuisance species. And you will see page 5, line 4, that's where you see that immediately before or immediately after. Because right now it's when leaving the water. And this is to allow before or after. All right, moving on then. Then on page 6. This is moving to DMV's registration requirements for vessels. The changes are, substantive changes are page 7, these are the definitions for the adding weight boat. Same definition that you saw earlier in the bill, same definition as what's in A. And then you can move to right now, it's the section on registration is just called the fees section, but it's actually the registration section.
So before we move on, my apologies, the definition of weight boat in section 7, because this is DMV language now.
Yeah,
Does it? Just wanting to, I'm wondering about using a cross-reference
you can do that.
instead of having a.
Yeah, sure, it's fine.
Um,
Do that.
just in case things evolve and changes are made.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
So the registration requirements, you will see page 7, line 18, there's the annually or biannually that's incurred involved for the registration of your motor boat. And then you'll see all the fees and all the different types of class motor boats that you may be. There's nothing being changed for that. If you're a wake boat that falls in one class and another owner has a wake boat that falls in another class, they're already subject to these differential fees, so not changing that.
Can I ask?
Oh, yes, you
What are the classes based on size?
Basically, yes.
Okay. And did we talk about? Guess when we had the conversation about like whether or not we we're gonna fund decom stations, we talked about. Fees to cover it, but we're not funding decom stations, we're just saying they're required and they have to find decom stations. That's not I understood, okay. So we don't need to change the fee.
So moving down on that page, and I'm moving quickly this time, page 8, line 20 and 21, you'll see the registration certificate shall be pocket size and available to all officers for inspection on the motor boat.
before we move on, because we were adding this or up on line 4.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is probably gonna go to finance anyway, but just noting, I'm assuming this bill will go to finance.
I would assume that the secretary will look at and see if the class that's being registered will change, and I think he will look at the registration certificate as changing. He will probably make a determination of the class is changing,
Okay,
even though it really isn't.
just making a note.
We'll get to talk about this
Even more. I don't know. Okay, anyway, all right, moving on.
You can move on to page 9, line 19, 21 on to page 10. So the application forms that the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles provides for registration of vessels shall include a checkbox for an owner to designate a motorboat as a wake boat. And I showed you their form. They already have a place where you check if you're a houseboat or etc. So they'll add it there. And they will also designate their home lake on the application form. And then the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles annually compiles the number of motorboats registered as wake boats. And then I have that gray because there was a question of whether or not you want them to submit that information to A&R and when.
Speaking for myself, I do want them to submit it to AR to DEC, and I have a note here that they can't do this until 28.
Yeah,
And so as soon as it becomes available, or
and then annually thereafter.
Yeah.
this feels like a good place to stop, but just want to check in with folks about anything that we've gone over, that you have concerns or questions about, or. Yeah,
There's a question, who's gonna track it down for the number of wake boats and the DD.
DMV, and they're gonna communicate that to DEC, to AR.
So I will make for the next draft,
Yeah.
the edits that you just requested, plus the edit you requested before, which was the outreach and education.
Mhm. That's great, and then is that outreach and education part gonna be in sections 1 through 6?
Yes.
Okay, so we might go over that when we see the new draft, but otherwise, feeling done with sections 1 through 6. Which feels like progress. Check, okay. Thank you, everybody. So, and actually, one further note, next week, when I think that we've got you scheduled for like a new draft, it will be a new draft, but we will continue our walkthrough of this checking off language. Okay.
Great.